Before we begin this remarkable story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss another incredible true story like this one. Now, let's begin. The corridors of Windsor Castle held secrets that stretched back centuries. Stone walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of monarchs, the whispers of conspiracies, and the quiet grief of royal families mourning their own. In the autumn of 2023, those corridors felt heavier than usual. Still echoing with the absence of Queen Elizabeth II, who had passed away just over a year before, Queen Camilla walked these halls with a mixture of reverence and uncertainty. She had been Charles's wife for years, his companion through scandal and redemption. But wearing the crown was different from standing beside it. Every day brought new responsibilities, new traditions to uphold, and new spaces to navigate, both physical and symbolic. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Camilla had been reviewing documents in the green drawing room when she realized she needed a specific piece of correspondence that might help clarify a matter of royal protocol. Her private secretary, Margaret Hartley, had mentioned that similar documents might be archived in the late Queen's private studia, room that had been sealed since Elizabeth's passing. Margaret was away handling other matters, and Camilla made a decision in the moment. She would retrieve the documents herself. After all, she was queen now. Surely, she had the authority to enter any room in her own residence. What Camilla didn't fully understand was the unspoken protocol surrounding the late Queen's chambers. King Charles had given quiet instructions that those rooms were to remain untouched for the time being. It wasn't official policy written in any document, it was something more profound. It was respect, grief, and the weight of history all bound together in an invisible seal stronger than any lock. Camilla made her way through the familiar corridors, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished floors. She wore a simple navy dress and pearls, her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Two ladies-in-waiting had been with her earlier, but she had dismissed them to handle the matter privately. She wanted a moment alone, a chance to connect with the space that had belonged to the woman whose role she now occupied. The corridor leading to the late Queen's private chambers was quieter than the rest of the castle. Fewer staff members passed through this section. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows that seemed to emphasize the solemnity of the space standing at the end of the corridor. Positioned precisely outside the ornate door to the Queen's former study was Royal Guard Sergeant James Whitmore. He was 52 years old, a career military man who had served the crown for 34 years. He had guarded for generations of royals. He had stood watch during state funerals, royal weddings, and quiet Tuesday afternoons when nothing happened at all. But more than that, Sergeant Whitmore had served Queen Elizabeth II directly for the last 15 years of her life. He had been part of her personal protection detail. He had traveled with her to Balmoral, to Sandringham, to every corner of the United Kingdom. He had stood outside her door during her final illness, retaining his post even as his heart broke. When the Queen had passed, Sergeant Whitmore had requested to be assigned to guard her sealed chambers. It was an unusual request. These assignments typically rotated, but his superiors had understood. This wasn't just duty for James Whitmore. It was devotion. He stood at perfect attention now, his dark uniform immaculate, his posture rigid. His weathered face showed the lines of decades of service, and his eyes, though focused straight ahead as protocol demanded, held a depth of emotion that came from genuine grief. Camilla approached the door, her mind focused on the documents she needed. She had been queen for over a year now, but there were still moments when the magnitude of her position felt surreal. She was still learning, still adjusting, still trying to fill shoes that seemed impossibly large. She reached for the door handle without really thinking about it. In her mind, this was a practical matter. She needed documents. They were likely inside. She was queen. It seemed straightforward, Your Majesty. The voice was firm, clear, and completely unexpected. Camilla's hand froze on the handle. She turned to look at Sergeant Whitmore, surprised. Royal Guards typically didn't speak unless spoken to, unless there was a security threat, or unless something was very wrong. Yes, Sergeant. Camilla replied, her tone uncertain. Sergeant Whitmore's gaze remained fixed forward. Not meeting her eyes directly protocol required him to maintain his formal stance, but his voice carried an unmistakable edge of steel. Your Majesty, I cannot permit you to enter these chambers. The words hung in the air between them. Camilla blinked, processing what she had just heard. A guard had just told her, the Queen, that she could not enter a room in her own residence. I beg your pardon? Camilla's voice carried a mixture of confusion and rising indignation. She was not a woman prone to pulling rank, but this seemed extraordinary. These chambers remain sealed by order of His Majesty the King, Sergeant Whitmore stated, his voice never wavering. No one is to enter without his express permission. Not staff. Not family. Not anyone, Your Majesty. Camilla felt her cheeks flush slightly. She was being reprimanded by a guard. In her year as queen, she had grown accustomed to deference. Two people stepping aside, two doors opening before she reached them. This was something entirely different. Sergeant Whitmore, is it? Camilla read his nameplate, her voice taking on a firmer tone. I am aware of protocols, but I need to retrieve some documents that may be in the late Queen's study. I'm certain this qualifies as an exception. With respect, Your Majesty, it does not. Whitmore's response was immediate and absolute. His Majesty was very clear. These chambers are not to be disturbed until he decides otherwise. The sergeant's hand had moved almost imperceptibly to rest on his sidearm, not a threat, but a statement of how seriously he took his duty. This man would physically prevent her from entering, if necessary. Camilla realized with shock. Sergeant, I don't think you understand, Camilla began, her voice rising slightly. I understand perfectly. Your Majesty. Whitmore finally allowed his eyes to meet hers briefly, and what Camilla saw there stopped her mid-sentence. There was no defiance in his gaze, no disrespect. There was only an unwavering commitment and something deeper, profound sorrow that he was trying to contain within the rigid framework of his duty. These were Her late Majesty's private chambers. Whitmore continued, his voice remaining steady despite the emotion behind it. She lived in these rooms. She worked in these rooms. She died with the memory of these rooms in her heart. And until His Majesty determines what is to be done with them, they remain as she left them. That is not my decision. That is not your decision, Your Majesty. That is the King's decision, and I will enforce it. Camilla stood there, her hands still on the door handle, suddenly feeling very small despite her title. She had been thinking only of practical matters, protocols, efficiency. But Sergeant Whitmore was protecting something far more precious than paperwork. He was guarding memory, grief, and the last physical space that belonged entirely to Queen Elizabeth II. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken complexity. Somewhere in the castle, a clock chimed the hour. 3 o'clock. Tea time. Elizabeth had always been punctual about tea. Camilla slowly released the door handle, her fingers trailing away from the brass as if it had suddenly become hot to the touch. She took a small step backward, her mind racing through a dozen different responses. She could insist. She could order Sergeant Whitmore to stand aside. She was, after all, the Queen. But something in the sergeant's stance, the quiet dignity of his defiance, made her pause. This wasn't about authority or hierarchy. This was about something deeper, something she was only beginning to understand. How long have you been stationed here, Sergeant? Camilla asked, her tone softening considerably. Since the day after Her late Majesty's passing, Your Majesty, Whitmore replied, his posture relaxing ever so slightly at the change in her demeanor. I requested this assignment specifically. You served her directly, didn't you? Camilla observed, piecing together the situation. For 15 years, Your Majesty. I was part of her personal protection detail. The first time a crack appeared in Whitmore's professional facade. His voice caught almost imperceptibly on the word her. Camilla studied the man before her with new eyes. She saw now what she had missed in her initial irritation. This wasn't a guard performing a duty. This was a man standing vigil over someone he had loved, in the way that devoted servants love those they serve. Tell me about her, Camilla said suddenly, surprising both herself and the sergeant. Tell me what she was like in those private moments, when the cameras weren't watching. Sergeant Whitmore blinked, clearly caught off guard by the request. It wasn't standard protocol. Queens didn't typically stand in corridors asking guards to share personal memories. But then again, nothing about this situation was standard. Your Majesty, I don't think, he began, hesitantly. Please, Camilla interrupted gently. I'm not trying to pry into state secrets. I just want to understand. I walk these halls every day wearing her crown, sitting in her chair, signing documents with her title, but I never really knew her, not the way you did. And sometimes I feel like I'm haunting a house that was never meant to be mine. The honesty in Camilla's voice seemed to reach something in Whitmore. He glanced down the corridor to ensure they were alone, then allowed himself to relax his stance just slightly, though he remained professional. She was kind, Whitmore said quietly. That's what people don't always understand. She could be formal, yes. She upheld protocol, absolutely. But in private moments, she was genuinely kind. She knew the names of every person who served her. She asked about our families. She remembered details, birthdays, children's names, whether your mother's surgery had gone well. Camilla listened intently, leaning slightly against the wall across from the sealed door. This was a side of Elizabeth she had only glimpsed occasionally, usually at family gatherings where the late Queen had maintained her characteristic reserve. 3 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with cancer, Whitmore continued, his voice thick with emotion. Stage 3. The doctors weren't optimistic. I tried to hide it, tried to stay focused on my duties, but Her late Majesty noticed. She always noticed. What did she do? Camilla asked softly. She called me into her study, this study right here, and she said, James, your wife needs you more than I do right now. Take leave. Be with her. Your position will be here when you return. Whitmore's eyes glistened. Most people in her position would have simply approved the leave request through the proper channels. But she spoke to me directly. She made it personal. She made me feel like my grief mattered. Did your wife recover? Camilla asked. She did, Your Majesty. Against all odds? And when I returned to service, Her late Majesty asked about her health before she asked about anything else. Every single time I saw her for the next 3 years, she asked about my wife. She never forgot. That was who she was. Camilla felt tears pricking at her own eyes. She thought about her own journey to this role, the years of public scrutiny, the accusations, the slow, painful process of earning acceptance. She had always known she could never replace Elizabeth in the public's heart. But standing here now, listening to Sergeant Whitmore, she understood something more profound. She wasn't meant to replace Elizabeth. She was meant to honor her by serving in her own way. I didn't come here to disrespect her memory, Camilla said quietly. I hope you know that. I came for documents, but I should have asked permission first. I should have understood what these rooms represent. Whitmore nodded slowly. Your Majesty, if I may speak candidly, please do. You're not Her late Majesty. No one expects you to be. She had 70 years to grow into her role. You've had barely one. But what matters isn't that you be her. What matters is that you be yourself, with the same dedication she showed. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But part of that dedication means respecting what came before. These chambers aren't just rooms. They're the last physical space where her presence remains undisturbed. When they're opened, when her things are sorted and distributed, and the rooms are repurposed, piece of her will be gone forever. His Majesty isn't ready for that yet. Perhaps none of us are. Camilla absorbed his words, feeling the weight of them settle over her like a heavy cloak. You're right, of course. I was being thoughtless. Practical when I should have been respectful. You're still learning, Your Majesty. That's not a criticism, it's simply fact. The late Queen had the advantage of time. You're being asked to run when you've barely learned to walk. The two of them stood in silence for a moment. The corridor around them quiet, except for the distant sounds of the castle footsteps on stairs somewhere. The faint chiming of another clock. The whisper of wind against old windows. Sergeant Whitmore, Camilla said finally, I want to apologize. Not just for today, but for any time I've been thoughtless about what Elizabeth meant to the people who served her. I know I'm not beloved the way she was. I know my path to this role was complicated and painful for many people, but I am trying. Whitmore's expression softened completely now. Your Majesty, if I may say so, trying is what matters. Her late Majesty wasn't perfect either, though. People forget that now. She made mistakes. She struggled. But she never stopped trying to serve with dignity and grace. That's all anyone can ask of you as well. A sound at the end of the corridor made them both turn. Margaret Hartley, Camilla's private secretary, was approaching quickly, her expression concerned. She must have been looking for the Queen. Your Majesty, there you are? I've been searching everywhere. The Archbishop is waiting for your meeting about the Christmas service arrangements. Camilla straightened, composing herself back into the formal posture expected of her position. But before she turned to leave, she looked once more at Sergeant Whitmore. Thank you, Sergeant. For your service to Her late Majesty and for your honesty with me today, I won't forget it. Whitmore came to full attention and saluted crisply. Your Majesty. As Camilla walked away with Margaret, the secretary lowered her voice. Ma'am, if I may ask, what were you doing here? These chambers are sealed. Yes, I know that now, Camilla replied quietly. I made a mistake, Margaret, but perhaps a necessary one. Margaret looked confused, but didn't press further. They walked in silence back toward the green drawing room, where the Archbishop waited. But Camilla's mind wasn't on the meeting ahead. She was thinking about Sergeant Whitmore standing alone in that corridor, guarding a door that led to rooms frozen in time. She was thinking about Elizabeth, who had shown kindness to a grieving man when she didn't have to. She was thinking about what it really meant to wear a crown, not the jewels and ceremony, but the responsibility to honor those who came before, while forging your own path forward. That evening, Camilla found King Charles in his private study, surrounded by papers and wearing the reading glasses he claimed he didn't need. He looked tired, a bone-deep weariness that had become his constant companion since ascending to the throne. The weight of monarchy had pressed down on him more heavily than he had anticipated, even after decades of preparation. Charles, Camilla said softly from the doorway. We need to talk. He looked up, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. That sounds ominous. Have I forgotten another engagement? Margaret assures me my schedule is burned into my brain, but I'm beginning to doubt its accuracy. Camilla closed the door behind her and sat in the leather chair across from his desk. It's about your mother's chambers at Windsor. Charles's expression changed instantly, the attempted lightness vanishing completely. His jaw tightened, and he set down his pen with deliberate care. What about them? I tried to enter them today, Camilla admitted. I was looking for some documents and thought they might be archived there. Sergeant Whitmore stopped me. Charles closed his eyes briefly as if gathering patience. He was following my instructions. I know that now. But Charles, you never told me they were sealed. You never explained I didn't think I needed to, Charles interrupted, his voice harder than usual. They were her private chambers. Common sense would suggest that entering them without permission would be inappropriate. Camilla felt the sting of his words but pushed forward. You're right. I should have asked. But darling, we need to talk about this. It's been over a year. You can't keep her rooms frozen forever like some kind of shrine. Charles stood abruptly, turning to face the window that overlooked the gardens. His reflection in the glass looked older than his years, burdened by grief and duty in equal measure. Can't I? She's my mother, Camilla. Those rooms still smell like her perfume. Her reading glasses are still on the table beside her chair. The book she was reading is still marked at page 143, and I have no idea how it ends because she'll never finish it. The raw pain in his voice made Camilla rise and move toward him, but he held up a hand to stop her. You didn't know her the way I did, Charles continued, his voice breaking slightly. You saw the Queen. I saw my mother. And I know intellectually that keeping those rooms sealed doesn't bring her back. I know it's not rational, but it's the last thing I have control over. I can't protect her anymore. I can't call her for advice. I can't make her laugh or frustrate her with my architectural obsessions. But I can protect those bloody rooms. Camilla stood frozen, her heart aching for her husband. She had seen him grieve before, but always with the stoic restraint expected of royalty. This was different. This was the private collapse that happened behind closed doors. I spoke with Sergeant Whitmore for quite a while today, Camilla said gently. He told me about how your mother helped him when his wife was ill, about how she remembered to ask about his family, about the kind of person she was when no one was watching. Charles turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed. James Whitmore is a good man. He loved her, in the way devoted servants love those they serve. He asked to guard those rooms, you know. I didn't assign him. He requested it. He told me, Charles, he's standing vigil over her memory the same way you are. But darling, at some point, we have to let go. Not forget, never forget, but let go. I'm not ready, Charles said simply, his voice barely above a whisper. No. And that's all right. But you need to communicate these things to me. I'm your wife. I'm your partner in this impossible job we've been given. You can't shut me out of the difficult parts. Charles moved away from the window and sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 75 years. I've been king for 14 months, and I still don't know what I'm doing. Every day I make 1,000 decisions, and half of them feel wrong. I look at her portrait in the throne room, and I wonder if she's disappointed in me. Camilla knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. Charles, listen to me. Your mother reigned for 70 years. You've reigned for barely one. You cannot compare yourself to 7 decades of experience. It's not fair, and it's not reasonable. She was so certain about everything, Charles said. She never seemed to doubt herself. She always knew the right thing to do, the right thing to say. And I'm constantly second-guessing every choice I make. Because you care, Camilla replied firmly. Because you understand the weight of what you're doing. That's not weakness, Charles. That's wisdom. Your mother had certainty because she came to the throne when she was young and grew into it gradually. You came to it as an older man with more life experience, more awareness of nuance and complexity. Of course you feel differently. Charles squeezed her hands, drawing strength from her presence. I miss her, Camilla. Every single day, I'll be in a meeting and something will happen. And my first thought is, I need to ask Mummy about this. And then I remember that I can't. That there will never be another conversation, another Sunday lunch, another Christmas at Sandringham with her at the head of the table. No, my darling. I know. They sat in silence for a moment, the study around them dark, except for the lamp on Charles's desk. Outside, night had fallen over London, and the city lights twinkled in the distance. What did you think of Sergeant Whitmore? Charles asked finally. Camilla considered the question carefully. I think he's a man of extraordinary dedication. I think he loved your mother deeply in his own way. And I think he's protecting her memory with the same fierceness he once protected her person. He was with her at the end, Charles said quietly. At Balmoral. He stood outside her door, even when the doctors said there was nothing more to be done. He stood there all night, until it was over. And then he stood there for 6 more hours, not moving, not speaking. Just standing guard one last time. Camilla felt tears sliding down her cheeks. He told me she was kind, that she remembered details about the people who served her, that she made him feel like his grief mattered when his wife was ill. Oh? Charles nodded. That was her gift. She could make anyone feel seen, feel valued. Even in the midst of state crises, even when the world was demanding her attention, she never forgot the human beings around her. I try to do the same, but I always feel like I'm falling short. You're not falling short, Charles. You're human. You're allowed to be human. Charles pulled Camilla up and wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. I'm sorry I snapped at you. About the chambers. You didn't deserve that. I deserved a little bit of it, Camilla admitted, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I was thoughtless. I should have asked, and I should have explained. I should have told you how I felt, instead of just issuing orders through staff. Charles pulled back to look at her. We're supposed to be a team, aren't we? That's what marriage is, even when it's a royal marriage. Especially when it's a royal marriage, Camilla corrected. We need each other more than most couples do. This job is impossible to do alone. Charles kissed her forehead gently. What would I do without you? Probably lock yourself in studies and talk to plants even more than you already do, Camilla teased gently. Trying to lighten the mood, despite everything. Charles laughed a real laugh that seemed to surprise him. The plants are excellent listeners. Never interrupt, never disagree. Unlike wives who do both regularly, Camilla smiled. 3 weeks passed after the incident in the corridor. Camilla and Charles settled back into the demanding routine of royal life state visits. Charity patronages, endless meetings about matters both significant and trivial. But something had shifted between them. They talked more openly now, shared their doubts and fears in ways they hadn't before. Charles found himself thinking constantly about Sergeant Whitmore standing guard outside his mother's chambers. One morning, during his private time before breakfast, he made a decision. He called for his private secretary. "I want to visit Sergeant Whitmore," Charles said. "At Windsor. Today, if possible." His secretary, a capable man named Robert Fellows, looked surprised. "Your Majesty, your schedule is quite full. There's the meeting with the Prime Minister at 11. Followed by reschedule what can be rescheduled, Charles interrupted gently but firmly. "This is important." 4 hours later, Charles walked the familiar corridors of Windsor Castle, his footsteps echoing in ways that still surprised him. He had walked these halls as a boy, as a young man, as a middle-aged prince. But walking them as king felt different, heavier somehow, as if the stones themselves recognized the change in his status. Sergeant Whitmore stood at his usual post outside the sealed chambers, his posture perfect, his expression neutral. When he saw the king approaching, he came to attention and saluted. "Your Majesty?" "At ease," Sergeant Charles said, stopping a few feet away. "I wanted to speak with you. Do you have a moment?" It was a rhetorical question. Guards always had time for the king, but Charles had learned from his mother to phrase commands as requests when dealing with people who served faithfully. "Goss." "Your Majesty," Whitmore replied, relaxing his stance slightly, but maintaining his professional demeanor. "My wife told me about your conversation," Charles began. "About what happened when she tried to enter these chambers." Whitmore's expression remained carefully neutral. "I was simply following your orders, Your Majesty. I hope I didn't cause any difficulty." "You did exactly right," Charles assured him. "I want you to know that. You were protecting something precious, and I'm grateful for it." He paused, looking at the sealed door. "How long have you been standing here, James?" The use of his first name clearly caught Whitmore off guard. "Every day since Her late Majesty's passing, Your Majesty." "I requested the assignment." "I know you did. But it's been over a year. Don't you think you deserve a different posting? Something less heavy?" Whitmore was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "With respect, Your Majesty, this is where I need to be. I know it seems strange, but I'm not ready to leave my post. Not yet." Charles studied the older man's face, seeing the grief that mirrored his own. "She meant a great deal to you." "She was the finest person I ever had the honor to serve," Whitmore said simply. "I would have taken a bullet for her without hesitation. Since I never had to do that, the least I can do is stand guard over her memory." "My wife said you told her about when your wife was ill, about how my mother gave you leave to be with her." Whitmore nodded. "She saved my marriage, Your Majesty. Maybe even saved my wife's life. I don't think Caroline would have fought as hard if I hadn't been there. And I wouldn't have been there if Her late Majesty hadn't insisted." "That sounds like her," Charles said softly. She understood that duty didn't mean sacrificing everything else. She knew that the people who served her had lives, had families, had hearts that could break. "She did, Your Majesty. And if I may say so, you have the same understanding? I've watched you with the staff. You remember names, ask about families, show genuine interest. You're more like her than you might realize." Charles felt emotion rising in his throat. "I don't feel like her. I feel like I'm stumbling through every day, making it up as I go along, hoping I don't destroy everything she built." Whitmore met the king's eyes directly, breaking protocol in a moment of genuine human connection. "Your Majesty." She felt the same way when she first became queen. I've read her early private secretary's memoirs. She was terrified. She was 25 years old, with 2 small children, and suddenly she was queen of the most powerful nation on earth. She grew into the role. You will too. Did she ever tell you that? About being afraid? Not in so many words, but I could see it sometimes, in quiet moments. Before big speeches, Before difficult decisions, she would get very still, very focused. It wasn't confidence, it was determination. She had decided she would do her duty no matter how she felt, and that determination carried her through. Charles absorbed this, finding unexpected comfort in knowing his mother had struggled too. The public image of Queen Elizabeth II was so perfect, so unshakable, that it was easy to forget she had been human, with human doubts and fears. "James," Charles said, "I need to open these chambers. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. It's time. But I can't do it alone." Whitmore straightened slightly, understanding the significance of what was being asked. "What would you need from me, Your Majesty?" "I need you to help me go through her things. You knew her, knew what mattered to her. You can help me decide what should be preserved, what should be distributed to family, what should be donated. And I need someone there who loved her, who will treat her belongings with the respect they deserve." It was an extraordinary request. Typically, such work would be handled by family members and senior household staff. But Charles understood that Whitmore's connection to his mother was unique, valuable in ways that transcended typical organizational charts. Whitmore's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Your Majesty, I would be honored. Truly honored." "There's something else," Charles continued. "When we're done, when the chambers have been sorted and cleared, I want you to be reassigned to a position of your choosing. You've stood vigil long enough. It's time for you to live again, not just guard the past. Appreciate that, Your Majesty. But I'm not sure I'm ready." "I know you're not ready now," Charles interrupted gently. "Neither am I, but we'll do this together. And when it's done, we'll both move forward." "Agreed?" Whitmore straightened and saluted. "Agreed, Your Majesty." Charles reached into his pocket and produced a key, ornate, old, the kind that had opened royal doors for centuries. He held it in his palm, looking at it as if it were both precious and terrifying. "This is the key to her study," Charles said quietly. "I've been carrying it with me for months, unable to use it, unable to face what's behind that door." He looked up at Whitmore. "Will you help me? Not today, but next week. We'll do it together." Whitmore took the key with both hands, as if receiving a sacred object. "I will be here, Your Majesty. Whatever you need." Charles placed a hand on the sergeant's shoulder, another break in protocol, but one that felt necessary. "Thank you, James, for your service to my mother and for your honesty with me and my wife. You're a good man. She made me want to be better, Your Majesty." That was her gift. She brought out the best in people. "Then let's honor her by continuing to be our best," Charles said, "even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." As Charles walked away from the sealed chambers, he felt something shift inside him. The grief remained, it would always remain, but alongside it was something new. Not quite peace, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. His mother was gone, but her influence lived on in the people she had touched. In the lives she had changed, in the love she had given so generously. The chambers would be opened. The belongings would be sorted. The rooms would eventually be repurposed, but the memory that would remain forever, not locked behind a sealed door, but living in the hearts of those who had known her, who had served her, who had loved her. The following Tuesday arrived with gray skies and a persistent drizzle, typical English weather that somehow seemed appropriate for the task ahead. King Charles arrived at Windsor Castle early, before most of the staff had begun their daily routines. He had slept poorly the night before, his dreams filled with memories of his mother. Camilla had offered to come with him, but Charles had gently declined. This was something he needed to do with only Sergeant Whitmore present. It felt right, somehow the son and the faithful servant, both saying their final goodbyes to the woman who would shape both their lives. Sergeant Whitmore was already waiting in the corridor when Charles arrived. He stood at attention wearing his dress uniform, the key Charles had given him the week before held carefully in his hand. His face was composed, but Charles could see the tension in his jaw, the slight redness around his eyes that suggested he too had struggled with sleep. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Whitmore said, his voice steady. "Good morning." James Charles stopped in front of the sealed door, staring at it as if it might disappear if he looked away. I've walked past this door 1,000 times since she died. I've imagined opening it, imagined what I'd find inside. But now that the moment is here, I find myself terrified. I understand, Your Majesty. I've stood guard here for over a year, and I've imagined the same thing. Charles took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders. Well, there's no sense in delaying further. Shall we? Whitmore stepped forward and inserted the key into the lock. The mechanism was old, well-made, and it turned with a solid click that seemed to echo down the corridor. He pushed the door open slowly, and both men stood at the threshold. Looking into the room beyond, the late Queen's private study was exactly as she had left it. Afternoon light tore what passed for it on this gray day, filtered through tall windows, illuminating a space that was both grand and intimate. The room was lined with bookshelves filled with volumes that showed the wear of actual reading, not just decorative placement. A large mahogany desk sat near the window, its surface organized, but not pristine. Papers were still arranged in neat stacks. A fountain pen lay at an angle, as if she had just set it down. Charles stepped inside first, his footsteps muffled by the Persian carpet. The scent hit him immediately, his mother's perfume. Faint but unmistakable, mixed with the smell of old books and furniture polish. It was so achingly familiar that he had to steady himself against the doorframe. Your Majesty, Whitmore asked with concern. I'm all right, Charles managed. It's just ... It smells like her. After all this time, the room still smells like her. Whitmore entered behind him, closing the door gently. He too seemed overwhelmed by the atmosphere of the room. She spent hours in here, he said quietly. Reading dispatch boxes, writing letters, thinking. She said this was the only place in any palace where she felt truly private. Charles walked slowly around the room, taking in every detail. On the desk was a photograph of his father, Prince Philip, taken decades earlier when they were both young. Next to it was a more recent photo of the entire family at Balmoral, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren all gathered together for what would be Elizabeth's last Christmas. Look at this, Charles said, picking up a small stack of correspondence from the desk. These are letters from children. Letters thanking her for various patronages, for hospital visits, for simply being the Queen. He read one aloud, his voice catching. Dear Queen Elizabeth, thank you for visiting my school. You made my mom cry happy tears. You are very nice for an old lady. Love, Sophie, age 7. Despite the emotion of the moment, both men smiled at the child's innocent honesty. She kept every letter she received from children, Whitmore said. There are boxes of them in that cabinet over there. She said they reminded her why service mattered. Charles set the letters down carefully and moved to the bookshelf. He ran his fingers along the spine's history books, biographies, novels, poetry collections. He pulled out one book and opened it to find his mother's handwriting in the margin. She had written notes to herself, responses to passages that had moved her or made her think. I never knew she annotated her books, Charles said. Surprised. She did it all the time, Whitmore replied. She said books were meant to be conversations, not monuments. She argued with authors, agreed with them, questioned their conclusions. The books were well loved, not just well kept. In the corner of the room sat a comfortable armchair with a footstool, positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon light. A blanket was draped over one arm, and on the small table beside it sat a book with a bookmark inserted near the middle. Charles picked it up carefully, a mystery novel by one of her favorite authors. Page 143, he said, remembering what he had told Camilla. She'll never know how it ends. Perhaps you could finish it for her, Your Majesty, Whitmore suggested gently. Read it and tell her how the story concludes next time you visit her memorial. The suggestion was so simple, yet so profound, that Charles felt tears finally spill down his cheeks. I think I will. She always did love a good mystery. They spent the next several hours going through the room systematically. Whitmore proved invaluable, knowing which items had particular significance, which photographs had special meaning, which papers were important state documents, and which were personal correspondence, in a drawer of the desk. They found something unexpected, a journal, leather-bound and worn. Charles hesitated before opening it, feeling like he was intruding on his mother's privacy. But Whitmore encouraged him.
She meant for this to be found, Your Majesty.
Otherwise, she would have destroyed it or specified what should be done with it. Charles opened the journal to a random page and began to read. It was dated 3 years earlier, shortly after Prince Philip had died. The palace feels empty without him. His mother had written in her careful script, I know he's been gone for such a short time, but already the silence is overwhelming. I find myself turning to tell him something, only to remember he's not there. Charles came to visit today. He's worried about me, though he tries to hide it. He's going to be a good king, better than he believes. I wish I could make him see that. I wish I could tell him that doubt is not weakness, it's wisdom. But he needs to discover that for himself. Charles's hands trembled as he read the words. His mother had believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. She had seen his potential even through all his doubts and missteps. He flipped through more pages, finding entries about state matters, family concerns, personal reflections on the nature of duty and service. In one entry written just months before her death, she had written about Camilla. I'm glad Charles has her. She makes him happy in ways I never fully appreciated. I was slow to accept her, bound by tradition and worried about public opinion. But she's proven herself worthy of the role. She'll be a good queen consort, steady and supportive. I hope she knows I came to respect her greatly, even if I was not always good at showing it. Your Majesty, you should read this, Whitmore said from across the room. He was holding a sealed envelope with Charles's name written on it in his mother's handwriting. Charles took the envelope with shaking hands. It was thick, substantial. He carefully broke the seal and withdrew several pages of letter paper covered in his mother's familiar writing. My dearest Charles, it began, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are king. I can only imagine how you must feel, overwhelmed, perhaps inadequate, certainly grieving. Let me tell you what I could never adequately express while I lived. Charles had to stop reading for a moment, overcome with emotion. Whitmore quietly moved to the window, giving the king privacy while remaining present. Charles continued reading through tears. His mother had written about her pride in him, her confidence in his abilities, her understanding of how difficult his position had always been. She acknowledged the mistakes she had made as a mother, too focused on duty to always give him the emotional support he needed. She wrote about Camilla giving her blessing and expressing gratitude that Charles had found happiness. Being king is not about being perfect, she had written. It's about being present, being steady, being willing to serve even when it's difficult. You have all of these qualities, Charles. You always have. Trust yourself. Trust your instincts. And know that I am immensely proud of the man you have become and the king you will be. The letter ended with simple words that carried infinite weight. I love you, my darling boy. I always have. I always will. Your loving mother, Elizabeth R. Charles folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest, unable to speak. Whitmore turned from the window, his own eyes wet with tears. 6 months had passed since Charles and Sergeant Whitmore had opened the late Queen's chambers. The castle felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight that no one had fully acknowledged had finally been lifted. The rooms had been respectfully cleared, some items distributed to family, others preserved for the royal archives, and a few precious pieces kept by Charles himself. True to his word, Charles had finished reading the mystery novel his mother had left unfinished. He had visited her memorial, and feeling only slightly foolish, had quietly told her how the story ended. The murderer had been the butler all along, a cliché that would have made Elizabeth laugh. Camilla stood in what had once been the late Queen's study. The room had been transformed into a library dedicated to Elizabeth's memory, a space where family members could come to read, to think, to feel close to the woman who had shaped them all. The bookshelves still held her books, but they were now supplemented with volumes about her reign, her life, her impact on the world. The photographs she had loved were displayed on the walls, creating a visual history of the Windsor family. It's beautiful, Camilla said to Charles, who stood beside her. She would have approved, I think. I hope so, Charles replied, his arm around his wife's shoulders. It felt wrong to just lock everything away, or to erase her presence entirely. This seemed like the right balance, honoring her memory while allowing the space to live again. Camilla noticed a new addition to the room, a small plaque on the wall near the door. She walked over to read it. In memory of Queen Elizabeth II, she served with grace, led with wisdom, and loved with generosity. Her presence remains in every corner of this house and in every heart she touched. James suggested the wording. Charles said, "He has quite a way with words for a military man." Speaking of James, where is he these days? I haven't seen him at Windsor in months. That's because he's not stationed here anymore. I reassigned him as promised. He's now head of security at the Royal Foundation. He visits youth programs, mentors, young people interested in military service, and occasionally gives talks about service and duty. He's brilliant at it. How is he doing? Camilla asked with genuine concern. Much better, actually. His wife Carolyn sent me a letter thanking me for the new assignment. She said James had been slowly fading away, standing guard over a ghost. But now he has purpose again. He's living again, not just existing. Camilla took Charles's hand. And what about you? Are you living again? Charles considered the question seriously. I think so. Some days are still hard. I still miss her terribly. But reading her letter, knowing that she believed in me, that she understood my struggles and didn't see them as weaknesses, it's made an enormous difference. You've changed these past months, Camilla observed. You seem more confident, more settled in your role. I've stopped trying to be her, Charles admitted. For so long, I thought I had to fill her shoes exactly, do everything the way she would have done it. But that was impossible and exhausting. Now I'm trying to honor her legacy while being my own kind of king. It's not perfect, but it feels more authentic. They walked together through the library, looking at the photographs and mementos. One picture showed a young Elizabeth with her children Charles, barely 3 years old, sitting on her lap while she read to him. The love in her expression was unmistakable. She loved you very much, Camilla said softly. I don't think you ever fully believed that. I knew it intellectually, Charles replied. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Reading her letter, seeing her handwritten words expressing her pride and love, that made it real in a way nothing else could. There was a knock on the open door, and Sergeant Whitmore appeared, dressed in civilian clothes rather than his uniform. He looked years younger than he had 6 months ago, his face less drawn, his posture more relaxed. James, Charles exclaimed with genuine pleasure. What brings you to Windsor? I was in the area for a foundation event and thought I'd stop by, Whitmore said, his tone warm. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Camilla assured him. Come in, please. We were just admiring what's been done with the room. Whitmore entered slowly, his eyes taking in the transformation. He walked to the bookshelf, running his hand along the spines, just as he had done countless times when standing guard outside. It's perfect, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She would have loved this, her things being used and appreciated rather than locked away. I have you to thank for that, Charles said. You helped me understand that honoring her memory didn't mean preserving everything exactly as it was. It meant allowing her influence to continue, to grow, to inspire future generations. Whitmore turned to face them both. Your Majesties, if I may speak candidly, please do, Charles encouraged. When I was standing guard outside these chambers for all those months, I thought I was protecting Her late Majesty's memory. But really I was protecting my own grief. I wasn't ready to let go, and standing guard gave me permission to hold on. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But grief isn't meant to be permanent. It's meant to transform into something else, into gratitude, into wisdom, into determination to live in ways that honor those we've lost. That's beautifully put, Camilla said. Her late Majesty taught me that, Whitmore continued. After Prince Philip died, I watched her grieve privately while continuing to serve publicly. She showed me that it's possible to hold both things at once, the sadness of loss and the determination to keep living purposefully. Charles nodded, deeply moved. She was extraordinary at that, at holding multiple truths simultaneously. She could be both mother and monarch, both grieving widow and working queen. I'm still learning how to manage those contradictions. But you are learning, Your Majesty, Whitmore said, and that's what matters. Her late Majesty wasn't born knowing how to be queen. She grew into it over 7 decades. You're doing the same thing, just starting from a different place in life. The three of them stood together in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. Outside the windows, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light across the room. I should let you both get back to your duties, Whitmore said finally. I just wanted to see the room one more time to make sure it was done right. Stay for tea, Camilla suggested impulsively. Surely you have time for tea. We could use the company, and I'd love to hear more about your work with the foundation. Whitmore looked uncertain, glancing at Charles for permission. The king smiled and nodded. Please stay, James. We'd genuinely enjoy it. They moved to a comfortable sitting area within the library, and staff brought tea and small sandwiches. For the next hour, they talked not about duty or protocol, but about life, about Whitmore's wife Caroline and her continued good health, about Charles and Camilla's grandchildren and their various antics, about the work Whitmore was doing with young people. I spoke to a group of teenagers last week, Whitmore shared. Kids from difficult backgrounds, most of them convinced they had no future. I told them about Her late Majesty, about how she noticed people, remembered details, made everyone feel valued, regardless of their station. And then I told them that they could do the same thing. That service and dignity aren't reserved for royalty. That anyone can choose to live with purpose and treat others with respect. How did they respond? Camilla asked. Better than I expected. One young man came up to me afterward and said, I never thought about the queen being a real person before. I just thought she was, a queen. But hearing you talk about her, she sounds like someone who actually cared. I told him that was exactly right. She was someone who cared. Deeply and genuinely. Charles listened with quiet pride. This was his mother's legacy, continuing in the most meaningful way possible, through people whose lives she had touched, who now touched others in turn. It was better than any monument, more lasting than any statue. As the afternoon drew to a close and Whitmore prepared to leave, Charles walked him to the door of the library. James, I want you to know that you'll always be welcome here. You were part of her life, and you helped me through one of the most difficult transitions I've ever faced. That makes you family in the ways that truly matter, and Whitmore's eyes misted. That means more than you know, Your Majesty. Thank you. After Whitmore had gone, Charles and Camilla remained in the library for a few more minutes. Charles walked to the window and looked out at the grounds, at the gardens his mother had loved, at the ancient stones that had sheltered generations of his family. Are you all right? Camilla asked, coming to stand beside him. I am, Charles said, and for the first time in a long time, it was completely true. I miss her. I always will. But I'm finally accepting that missing her and moving forward aren't contradictory things. I can do both. Camilla slipped her arm through his. She would be proud of you. Not just for being king, but for being human enough to grieve, strong enough to let go, and wise enough to honor her while still being yourself. Charles turned to embrace his wife, holding her tightly. Thank you for being patient with me. For understanding that I needed time, that this process couldn't be rushed. That's what love is, Camilla replied simply. Giving people the time and space they need, even when it's difficult. As they left the library together, Charles took one last look back at the room. The late afternoon sun illuminated the photographs on the walls, making them glow with warm light. In one picture, his mother was laughing, her face animated with genuine joy. It was that image, not the formal portraits, not the official photographs, but that moment of pure, unguarded happiness that Charles wanted to remember most. Goodbye, Mummy, he whispered one more time. Thank you for showing me how to serve, how to lead, and how to love. I'll carry you with me always. Then he closed the door gently behind him, not sealing it away, but simply leaving a room that would be there whenever anyone needed to feel close to the remarkable woman it honored. The chambers were no longer sealed. The grief was no longer paralyzing. And life, with all its responsibilities and joys, moved forward as it always must, carrying the best of the past into an uncertain but hopeful future.